When my husband and I were first married, some 29 years ago, he took me to Columbus, Ohio to meet his family. His mother lived on West 2nd Avenue, and his sister and her family lived across the street from her. Tootie, my husband's sister, was a nice, friendly person, and we got along great from day one. She and her family lived in a big old house that, like many other old houses, had been divided into 2 apartments, one upstairs and one down. Tootie and her family lived in the downstairs apartment. My husband and I were staying with his mother, but we visited Tootie and her family every day. Several times during the visits, I heard the front door open. The 2 apartments shared a common front door and foyer, then each had their own individual doors to the apartments. Footsteps going up the stairs to the other apartment, and then what sounded like people moving around up there. I found nothing strange about this, as I was not familiar with the house or its occupants. Then one night, Tootie, her 3 children, and I were alone in her apartment. She was in the kitchen fixing supper, while I kept an eye on the kids who were watching TV in the living room. Again, I heard the outside door open, someone going up the stairs, and the door to the other apartment open and close. About that time, Tootie called the kids and me to supper. During the course of conversation over supper, I asked her who lived in the upstairs apartment. No one, she said. That apartment has been empty since we moved here, 3 years ago. I felt the blood draining from my face because I knew that someone had been going up there all week and was, in fact, up there at the moment we were talking. My first thought was that someone was up to no good and that they were using the empty apartment as a base. Tootie was looking at me strangely. Someone is up there, I said. I heard them go up there a while ago. That's impossible, Tootie replied. The only other person with the key to that apartment besides myself, the landlord had given her a key so she could check on the other apartment from time to time, is the landlord, and he's out of town this week. At that moment, we all heard heavy footsteps plodding down the hallway upstairs. The hallway led down a block flight of stairs, which ended at a door, which was kept locked at all times, that opened into Tootie's apartment. The footsteps were headed for that door. Badly frightened, we all jumped up from the table. "Call the police," I screamed. "I'll call Ted's, her husband's brother," she said. "He lives just 2 houses down the street and can get here before the police." Tootie's brother-in-law and a friend that happened to be visiting him arrived within minutes of her frantic call. Tootie gave them the key to the apartment, and they just went upstairs with flashlights. There was no electricity on in the upstairs apartment to check things out. Tootie, the kids, and I sat huddled in the kitchen, expecting the man to yell "call the police" at any moment, but nothing happened. Then, we heard footsteps coming down the stairs to the door that led into the kitchen. There they stopped. We thought it was Tootie's brother-in-law and his friend, and Tootie called out to him. There was no answer. A few minutes later, Tootie's brother-in-law and his friend came down the stairs via the door in the kitchen and called for Tootie to let them in. They had seen or heard nothing, they said, and had been through the whole apartment. They probably thought we were 2 hysterical women who had spooked each other, but we knew what we had heard. Tootie said that after that night, the footsteps and banging doors in the upstairs apartment got so bad that she eventually moved out, even though her apartment was a really nice place. She moved across the street to the house where her mother had lived and stayed there for the next 10 years. People moved in and out of the downstairs apartment in her old house at an alarming rate, and no one ever stayed long. Strangely enough, no one ever rented the upstairs apartment, even though it was a nice place. About 10 years after this incident, a strange odor started permeating the air on West 2nd Avenue. It smelled like something dead. Everyone up and down the street assumed that some large animal, a dog maybe, had crawled into the basement of a house and died. Eventually, they decided the odor was coming from the house that Tootie had lived in. The police were called to investigate, and they found the body of Tootie's former landlord, you guessed it, in the upstairs apartment. One has to wonder if the entity that haunted the place had anything to do with the old man's death. I certainly hope not. I hope he died a peaceful death, but the police said a pure look of terror was frozen on his face when they found his decomposing body in that awful apartment. Thanks for reading. Last year in the month of June, my twin sister Kelly decided that she didn't want to be on this earth anymore. We were both 20 years old, and I knew at that time she was going through a depressed state. Being her closest sister, I could sense her depression first off before anyone, but just thought it was friends, or maybe that she wasn't feeling well. Her mood swings were affecting mom and dad, and they were concerned if she was sick or worried about anything that she could tell them, but she didn't let anyone know her reasons for being moody. 2 months before she died, she started writing in a journal. It wasn't a daily journal, but she entered things in it that were occurring in her life, or about how she was feeling. One of her entries captured my attention. She wrote about a 22-year-old man by the name of David and his visits to her. At first I thought it was someone she was seeing that none of us knew about, but as I read on, she mentioned that David was a ghost, but he didn't scare her. She went on about how she came to visit her when she was alone in her room and when she was asleep. His presence was always willed because he would touch her lightly on her hair or on her shoulder, and it would be a very cold feeling. Kelly went on to say that this only happened in her room. At first when I read the story, I was a little frightened that this was happening in our house, but then Kelly wrote that David was a gentle spirit that kept her company, and she became very attached to him after some time. Then her depression set in. She didn't want to live anymore and go through the hassles of being an adult with all the responsibilities involved. I always knew she wanted life to be handed to her on a silver platter, and that she was never one to be realistic. She just ignored the important things in life and went on. She entered into her journal that life was boring and that she didn't have the same direction or goals that I had. We were identical twins, but had totally different personalities. I cried when I read that because I would have always tried to help her if she was sad. I wish I had been a better sister to her during her depressed time, and I get mad at myself for not being persistent enough to have helped her. Kelly's last entry was 2 weeks before she died, and it said that life with David would be more happier for her. She would plan her departure to be with David soon, and she hoped that everyone would understand what she was going through and that this is what she wanted to do. I've never understood why she killed herself, and neither has anyone else. The reason why she died is just too bizarre to understand. On December 10th, at about 11 p.m., I was closing all the windows and locking the doors in our house before I went to bed. Mom and Dad had gone away for a couple of days for a break from work, and Mom still had not gotten over Kelly's death, so I was the only one at home as I was securing the house when I heard the sounds of someone running up the stairs and laughter. My heart started pounding as I knew no one was in the house except for me. I wasn't sure what to do, so I grabbed one of Mom's kitchen knives and started up the stairs. Then the running footsteps vanished into Kelly's old room and the laughter continued. Now my stomach was churning, and I was scared to even look. I just thought to myself that this can't be happening, and gripped the knife tightly as I neared the entrance of the room. As I edged closer, I heard the sounds of two people, but couldn't understand what they were saying. I could only hear the voice of a male and a female. I asked who was there, but no one replied, so I stormed into Kelly's bedroom. It was empty. I opened the wardrobe door to see if anyone was hiding in there, and that was also empty. But oddly, her bedroom window was open, and a cool breeze was entering the room. As I turned around, I was startled to see a hazy figure standing at the bedroom doorway. My heart felt like it was going to be ripped out as it was beating so fast. I stood in shock and stared in amazement. Even though I felt silly for asking, I asked if she was Kelly. I could tell by the shape of the figure that it was a female, and then she started to come towards me. I backed off a bit, and then she became familiar with me. She was wearing faded blue jeans and a blue top. Tears were streaming down my face. These were the same clothes Kelly had worn when she had hung herself. Even though her face was not clear to me, I knew that she was smiling. She blew me a kiss and walked out of the room and into the hallway. I ran after her, but she had disappeared quicker than a blink of an eye. After that experience, I've always had a feeling that Kelly is watching me. It's a scary memory I have of her visit, but I do feel comforted that she is not sad. I miss her deeply and have not seen her spirit since. I hope she is finally at rest. Before I moved to Las Vegas, I used to visit a lot. My family and I enjoyed staying at the various hotels. About 3 years ago, we stayed at one of the original older hotel casinos on the Strip in Las Vegas. At the time, this hotel casino was experiencing difficulties with the union. Our room was 179. When we got to the door, I put in the key card. The little green light went on, and I tried to open the door. It was impossible to open. It took me and my dad to open it. At the time, we thought it was some kind of vacuum or the hinges on the door needed to be fixed. Of course, 5 minutes later, we forgot all about it. A few minutes after I put my clothes in the drawers, I searched around the room to check for any dropped casino chips from past guests. To my dismay, I found nothing. After that, I looked for the Bible in the room. There was none. Now that was odd. They are always in hotel rooms. Someone must have taken it. Later that day, we all went out to the Strip. My mom got tired around 11 o'clock, so she went back to the room. Me and my dad stayed out till 1 o'clock in the morning. When we got back, I was really tired. I slept on the couch and my parents slept on the bed. We had a suite. The next morning, my dad was almost crying. He said that he had seen a ghost. I thought he was joking because he had always said that there was no such things. He said he saw it around 4:45 in the morning. According to him, he felt something at the foot of the bed. He turned over, sat up, and opened his eyes. Standing before him was a woman dressed in a white dress. He said it looked like something from the 40s or 50s. The lady had her arms folded across her chest. He could see all the wrinkles in her dress. She just stood there and didn't make a sound, but he did not see a face or hands, just whiteness. When he saw her, he yelled at my mom to wake up. My mom didn't wake up right away. He shook her a few times to wake up. When she did, my dad looked at the woman at the foot of the bed. Then, she just dissipated from the outside in. They didn't want to wake me until 8 a.m. They said they didn't want to keep me awake. I really don't know what to think. So, being the smartass that I am, I lit a match and said, "Ghost, you are no longer welcome here. Get out of your room." But then I said, "Oh, never mind. You can just stay over in that corner if you don't bother us." My parents were apprehensive about staying another night. I convinced them that we should stay another night because I thought it would be cool, and so they agreed. That night, I fell asleep around 12:30. At about 4 in the morning, I felt something in the room. I was afraid to look. I put my head in my blankets for about 15 minutes. I was breathing pretty hard. I decided to stick my head out of the blankets, and when I did, I was scared out of my pajamas. There, in the corner that I had told the ghost to go, was the ghost, white dress and all. Immediately, I put my head under the covers. Tears were coming down my face. I hoped to God that the ghost didn't come over to me. I stayed awake and didn't move until I heard my parents were awake. When I had told them what had happened, they decided that we would never return to this hotel ever again. We packed up all of our stuff and headed out, and when we got to the door, the maid was there. My dad asked her, "What was that we saw in the room?" The maid's eyes got big, and she asked us if we had seen the ghost. We all answered yes in unison. She said that she would not clean the room, handed off the towels to us, and ran off crying. When we checked out, we didn't ask anyone about the ghost because we didn't want to cause a scene. When we got home, I told all my friends about it. They all said cool. I don't think it was cool at all. At work, my dad asked if anybody knew any ghost stories about the place we had stayed at. One of his coworker girlfriends who had been a cocktail waitress there and said that in the 50s, a country western singer had stayed there. He was cheating on his wife with his mistress. His wife visited him while he was in bed with the mistress and shot her, the mistress. That's all of the story I heard. The mistress of the man may or may not be the ghost in room 179, but all I know is that there is a ghost in that room, and I'll never go there ever again. My teen years were turbulent and not very pleasant. I won't go into too much detail, but a little background is necessary in order to fully explain the story I have to tell. My family Being military, traveled often. This made us very dependent on one another. However, in 1985, my father retired to a small, miserable town called Lebanon in the cornfields of Illinois. Being a small town, it was chock full of every small town cliche imaginable. My sister, being 2 years older than I, found the prospect of not being uprooted suddenly very pleasing and made many friends very easily. I, on the other hand, couldn't stand the bumpkins we lived among and quickly became the town outcast. My father, hating retirement, found a local job and was gone from the house a lot. My mother and I were never close, and she soon became lost in my sister's popularity and forgot about me. None of this bothered me after all. I knew one day I would leave. Nonetheless, I found myself alone a lot. Our house was a clone of the typical 1950s two-story white house. We even had the white picket fence in the backyard. There had only been one previous owner of our abode, a nice old couple that had retired to Florida. They did not smoke, and no one in my family did at that time. However, shortly after moving in, we would smell cigarette smoke in various areas of the house. It was so strong, it would make one's eyes water. Then it would be gone. My father was never a believer, still isn't, so this was easily dismissed by him. However, my mother soon named the smoke the work of Fred. Once Fred became named, he made himself very believable. The footsteps, the lights, so on were all par for the cause. However, Fred's favorite activity would be rearranging the food in the fridge. We would come to breakfast in the morning, and all the food would be alphabetized or arranged according to color, size, so on. Once he even crammed all the food onto one shelf. My mother yelled, "Oh, Fred, don't you ever do that again. Now clean this up." The next time the door was opened, it was cleaned, although my father would say it was a half-ass effort. But it was when I was alone that I could feel Fred more closely. He would be there so strongly. I would talk to him out loud, never getting an answer but feeling better. In our basement was a makeshift hobby room the previous owner had constructed. We kept our tools in this room as well as our empty luggage. When I would enter this room, I would feel like I was intruding. It always felt cold, and as soon as I found what I was looking for, the feeling to get out would be even stronger. Nothing bad ever happened, just the urgency to get out. I asked Fred if he wanted me to stay out of his room. The lights began to flicker, and I took that as a yes. I moved the tools and luggage and never went in there again. This continued for 3 years until one day I was viciously attacked. Gotta love those small towns. Once I returned home and slept in my bed again, I felt someone sit down next to me. I thought it was my sister, but when I looked, I saw only a butt print, no body. I cried and talked to Fred all night about what had happened, and from that point on, he slept with me every night. I could sometimes feel him sit next to me on the couch or on the front porch swing. He was very comforting. I graduated from high school in 1990 and got the hell out of Dodge. The last night I was to sleep at home, I told Fred I was leaving. I heard a very heavy sigh explode next to me. I promised I would visit, and I did. Each time I would visit, he would sit next to me, and I would fill him in on my life. Then in 1995, my parents moved to Alabama and sold the house. On the last day that I would ever be in the house, I had to say goodbye to Fred. I went into my now empty room and told Fred the news. I heard the sigh again, then footsteps as he walked away from me, down the stairs and then into the basement. I cried all the way home. Someone else lives in the house now. I drove by it yesterday, the first time in almost 4 years. It looked well taken care of. I wonder if Fred is still there, if he likes the new people. I wonder if they like him. I miss him, my friend, and think of him often. I lived in Savannah, Georgia for almost 3 years. It is the most haunted city in the US. I feel, and I have several stories to prove it, perhaps some other time. Thank you for letting me tell my story. Hey guys, Phantom here, and I just wanted to say, it's kinda rainy outside, and that makes it that much more spooky to deliver you another video that's creepier than myself. Sorry about that. I tried to imitate my intro, and apparently I don't do that so well. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for liking, commenting, and subscribing. I'm assuming you're going to do that anyway because you guys are just lovely people. So, I mean, that's what I would do because, you know, comment, like, and subscribe. Share the video because if you don't share, it will not share life because it doesn't make sense. There I go. See? You guys knew that I wasn't going to make sense eventually, and that just proved it. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the nonsensical babble every time because I know I hear it a lot. I know you guys love it, but I don't know if I love it. Actually, I do love it. That's why I keep saying it. All right, Phantom, you need to cut it out. You're not even funny. Why do you attempt to be funny? I don't even understand you. You're like the least funniest person in the horror community. Everything is horrifying that you do. Phantom, you might as well just make 3 true horrifying jokes that Phantom made that kill us all. Because this shit is embarrassing. You know what? Screw the monetization this time. You know what? I don't care anymore. People don't care about the horror community as much as Google does. Bye. Love you guys.